Okay, we'll go ahead and get started and then call to order the regular meeting for the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for December 19th, 2013. First item on the agenda is consideration of the minutes for our regular meeting from November 21st, 2013. Those minutes were provided to the board members. Are there any changes that need to be made to those?
No.
If not, those will stand approved, and we'll continue now on to new business. Our first item is a variance request, application Z13070 by Mr. Thomas Steffen for D.R. Horton, Inc., requesting a 3-foot variance from the minimum required 25-foot rear building setback for principal structures for property located in an RS-10 zone at 5133 General Patton Avenue, also identified as Lot 200 of the Liberty Valley subdivision. Matthew, if you would review that for us.
Yes. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young, and good afternoon, Vice Chairman Young and members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Our first item, as you mentioned, is for a rear setback variance request at 5133 General Patton Avenue, as you mentioned, also identified as Lot 200 of the Liberty Valley subdivision. Liberty Valley is located the very north end of the city of Murfreesboro, which would be west of Lebanon Pike or US 231 and adjacent to Central Valley Road. Mr. Steffen represents D.R. Horton, who is a home builder. They have purchased the lot and would like to build a single-family residence on the lot. Property is zoned RS-10, single-family residential, with a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. The shape of the lot, or the size of the lot, is compliant with our RS-12 zoning district, or the RS-10 zoning district. The lot itself is over 12,000 square feet, but there is the shape of the lot has created an unusual circumstance for the applicant. As you can see, the property is identified with the word site on the aerial photograph on the screen in front of you, and there is an unusual street configuration at the intersection of General Patton Avenue and Bastogne Way. You can see at this intersection there is what we would call an elbow to that intersection that forms somewhat of a cul-de-sac at this intersection, which has pushed the front property line, and as a result the front setback further off of General Patton Avenue than the homes that are to the south along General Patton Avenue, which are also zoned RS-10. You'll notice just by looking at the aerial photo, the front property line, because of the curve of that elbow, takes away about 20 feet of the building envelope as compared to the lots to the south on General Patton Avenue. As a result, the applicant has requested a 3-foot rear setback variance of the 25-foot minimum required building setback in the RS-10 zone. You'll notice on the plot plan that you have before you, he is showing a distance of 22.7 feet from the rear property line to the rear of the house, which would require a 2.3-foot variance. We've gone ahead and advertised it as a 3-foot variance just to allow for some flexibility in the construction of that house. The primary reason the applicant has given for requesting this variance is because of the curve of that elbow or cul-de-sac of General Patton and Bastogne Way. At its shallowest point, the depth of the building envelope adjacent to the curve of the elbow is approximately 51 or 52 feet. As mentioned earlier, the proposed house will be located approximately 22 feet from the rear lot line. Staff estimates that the houses to the south are approximately 40 to 45 feet off of their respective rear property lines. However, the building envelopes of the lot to the south, as I mentioned earlier, have approximately 20 feet of additional depth at the front due to not being encumbered by the curve of that elbow. And the applicant feels that the variance is justified because of the elbow of the intersection of these two streets. And he also indicates that the size and shape of the lot were created by others and were present at the time that his company purchased it. So he indicates that it wasn't created by his company, the present owner of the property. The board should note that on his plot plan, the applicant has committed to locating the HVAC unit on the north side of the house outside of the rear setback. So even though the house would be encroaching into the rear setback, the HVAC units would be in the generous side yard on the north side of the house. Now some photographs of the property. Here's the subject property as viewed from the street. The adjacent property to the west, which will be future sections of the Liberty Valley subdivision, also zoned single-family residential. The adjacent property to the south, and this is the rear yards of the existing houses to the south. It's a little bit, the photograph is a little bit deceptive in comparing the locations of those place sets with the rear property lines. It appears that those place sets may be located actually on the property to the rear. So the backyards aren't quite as generous as they appear on this photograph. And the vacant lot to the north, there's a house on the lot to the south, and the lot to the north is vacant. And then looking across General Patton Avenue from the subject property. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions with regard to this request before or after the public hearing. And Mr. Steffen is in attendance if you have any questions for him as well.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? I've got one thing I was going to mention. Any patios or deck or something off the back of the house wouldn't fall into? That's
correct. Unless it was covered, the patio would be able to encroach into that rear setback.
Okay. Anything else for Matthew? If not, Mr. Steffen, anything you'd like to add to the application? Please come forward.
Thanks for hearing the variance request. Matthew, thanks for doing the explanation. He spelled it out really clearly what we are trying to attempt. I would like to add the proposed house that we're trying to fit on the lot is our smallest house we have available. One other reason that we're requesting, we actually have a contract for this house on this lot, and the existing house to the south is her daughter. So we're trying to accommodate a handful of different, whether or not that's taken into consideration, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Any questions for Mr. Steffen? Done here. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
At this time, we'll conduct the public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against the application, if you'd come forward and state your name and address for us, please.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Howard Wall, and I'm the owner and general partner of Liberty Heights. And I've checked with immediate neighbors around there, and they have absolutely no problem with this small variance. And we've had no calls at either my company or the management company concerning this. So we're proud to have them out there and hope you will approve it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else present wish to speak on this application? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and open the floor for further discussion or motion.
Mr. Chairman, if no other questions, I'll make a motion to approve the 3-foot variance.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Next, we'll move to application Z13071 by Mr. Wayne Belt for Believers Chapel, Inc., making the following request for property located in the commercial highway and residential multifamily RM16 zones at 1820 South Rutherford Boulevard. There are 4 components to this application that we will need to address separately. The first is a 32-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front building setback, as stated in Chart 2 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance. Part 2 pertains to a variance from Section 25E5, which states that in all commercial and industrial districts, accessory structures and uses shall comply with the same front setback as is required for the principal structure. Third component is pertaining to the proposed heating and air equipment, a 32-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front building setback for accessory structures. And the fourth component, a variance from Section 27L1B and Table 1 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which state that a Type C buffer zone is required to be planted when property in a commercial highway zone abuts property in an RM16 residential multifamily zone. After that tongue twister, pass it off to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. The subject property, as you mentioned, is located at 1820 South Rutherford Boulevard. It's the location of the existing Believers Chapel Church. The property is primarily zoned RM16, but a portion of it is zoned commercial highway. And you can see on the, I pulled up the zoning map here, there's it's a flag lot that has an appendage that sticks out to South Rutherford Boulevard, and the flagpole is zoned commercial highway, and there's a small portion of the property to the south of that flagpole that is also zoned commercial highway. But the balance of the property is zoned RM16. In both the commercial highway and RM16 zones, institutional group assembly uses are permitted by right, and a church is classified as an institutional group assembly use. So the church is not before you today for a special use permit, but rather for several variances to our zoning regulations. First of all, I'd kind of like to go over with you what they are, the work that they're proposing to do right now, as well as what is in their master plan. You'll see on the, and you have a copy of the site plan in front of you. They've submitted site plans to the planning staff for review, as well as for these variance requests. They're proposing to build a small parking lot expansion at the southeast corner of the site, and also to build a water line along the western property line so that their existing buildings can have a sprinkler system installed. You'll also see that there are two proposed building additions that are not to be constructed in the immediate future, but they're master plan for building construction. And what the applicant wanted to go ahead and do now was kind of, as he was master planning for the remainder of the site, he identified some variances that he wanted to request, so that the parameters of how he could develop the rest of those buildings would be defined for the future. I'll go back to the aerial photo. You'll see there are a variety of land uses in the area. Along South Rutherford Boulevard is zoned commercial highway, and there are several different types of commercial uses, offices, daycare, and directly across South Rutherford Boulevard is the Black Fox Elementary School. Directly to the west of the subject property is the Black Fox Crossing 1 zero lot line single-family development, and to the southwest of the subject property is the Black Fox Crossing 2 zero lot line development. You'll see that the southern portion of the subject property is not currently developed. Then as we move along here over to the southeast side, it's the Keeneland Crossing zero lot line single-family development, and to the east of the subject property is the Keeneland single-family detached subdivision. And as we go on to the next aerial photo, which is kind of zoomed in a little bit, you'll see where the word site is located. That is where the proposed future buildings in their master plan are proposed to be located, and that is the portion of the site where the applicant is requesting the variances. There are four components to this application, as Vice Chairman Young went over. The first requirement, or the first variance that the applicant is requesting, is a variance from the 42-foot front building setback. I'm going to go back over here to the aerial photo. For flag lots, the front lot line is defined as the lot line that is closest to the public right-of-way and most parallel to the public right-of-way. So the lot line that I'm pointing to right now is considered the front lot line, even though it does not have any direct bordering on public right-of-way. So because that is considered a front lot line adjacent to this office development here, the building is required to meet the 42-foot front setback requirement in the commercial highway zone. The applicant views this lot line for the church's purposes as more of a side lot line, and so he is requesting a 32-foot front setback variance to the 42-foot front setback requirement along this northern property line. And the reasoning in his variance request, as I mentioned, is he considers that to be more of a side lot line, and then also he indicates that because the property to the north is actually developed with an office complex, as you can see in the aerial photo, and the very southern portion of that property consists of a parking lot, that it will have limited impact on that property to the north if the building is moved closer to that lot line than 42 feet. He also indicates in his letter to the BZA that the building is actually greater than 300 feet off of South Rutherford Boulevard, so the variance will have little effect on the view shed of the public right-of-way. The southern 60 to 70 feet of the property to the north consists of a parking lot, as I mentioned. And as an aside, staff wishes to point out that there is an existing drainage swale along that northern property line, and if the variance is approved and the building is allowed to be 10 feet from the property line, the design engineer at the time of site plan review will need to provide an appropriate design to accommodate the drainage on the north side of the building. But our engineering department does not think that that is something that cannot be overcome.
Matthew, can I ask you a question specific to this? So if this was being considered as a side lot line versus a front lot line, what would be the side setback requirement, just out of curiosity?
In the commercial highway zone, if commercial highway abuts commercial highway, then there is a 0-foot side setback as long as they can meet fire rating requirements.
Okay.
And the applicant is also requesting 2 variances with regards to the HVAC equipment. The HVAC equipment on the other buildings that are adjacent to the western lot line are to the rear of the buildings adjacent to that western lot line. The applicant at this point has no firm building design, but he would like to be able to put the HVAC units on the west side of the buildings, and he doesn't know where those would go on the west side of the buildings, but he wants to preserve the ability to have those HVAC units within that 42-foot front setback from the northern property line. So he has requested variances from the zoning ordinance requirements for accessory structures, which HVAC units are considered to be accessory structures, to not be located in any required front setback. So those 2 variances pertain to the second and third variances pertain to the HVAC equipment. And finally, he has requested a landscape variance. And we'll go back to the zoning map and see that area of commercial highway that swings down and abuts a small segment of the western property line. Because the church property is zoned commercial, because that small portion of the church property is zoned commercial highway, it means that along that 120-foot segment of that western property line, a type C buffer is required. And now to zoom in a little bit more, you can imagine the zoning boundaries on this aerial photo from this corner here down to the corner of this lot here. It's about 120 feet, and the corner of this lot here is where the CH zoning boundary actually ends. So the buffer, type C buffer, would be required from this property corner down to this property corner, about 120 feet. And the zoning was, the master zoning plan for this area was put in place before any of this development occurred. So as a result, we wound up with an irregular zoning boundary to where this property is split zone, partially RM16 and partially commercial highway. The church is requesting a variance from the requirement to plant a type C buffer along this 120-foot segment of the western property line. Right now, they maintain, the church maintains standard perimeter plantings along this western property line because no buffer was required along the portion of the property that's zoned RM16 back when the earlier church buildings were constructed. The existing buildings are approximately 30 feet from the west property line. The site plan shows the proposed building additions to be the same distance from the west property line. The rear of the existing sanctuary building appears to consist of a drive-it material, while the rear of the existing children's education wing consists of metal siding. This is the sanctuary building here, and this is the children's education wing here. To the rear of the buildings are the church's HVAC units. 20 feet from the western property line is a wooden privacy fence. In between the fence and the property line is a 20-foot drainage easement, which contains a row of trees. I called those out as pin oak trees in my staff comments, but the applicant has since corrected me that they are, I believe, some type of maples, I believe. The applicant proposes to record a water line easement in the same location as the drainage easement in order to construct the new water line. The trees may have to be moved in order to accommodate the new water line. But what he would like to do is to, instead of installing that type C buffer along that 120-foot segment of the property line, he would like to instead just continue with the perimeter plantings, the standard perimeter plantings as he has done with the remainder of that western property line, as well as the privacy fence, which actually already stretches close to that northern property line. The applicant would like to utilize the existing privacy fence to screen the church property, including the HVAC units, from the neighbors to the west. The western property line is over 700 feet in length, and the applicant would like to maintain consistency along this property line. He thinks that it is not practical to install a type C buffer adjacent to only a 120-foot segment of this property line. He has indicated that he is open to utilizing other screening methods, however. It should be noted, though, that any plantings proposed or required in the existing drainage easement / proposed water line easement, including the relocation of the existing trees, must be designed so that it doesn't compromise the easements and associated infrastructure. And any landscaping proposed in these easements will be subject to the approval of the city engineering and water and sewer departments. Each of the four requests should be taken in separate motions, and Mr. Belt, the applicant, is here if you have any questions for him. But before the public hearing, I'll show you some photographs of the existing site. This is looking south at the existing church building and southwest of the existing church building. That's the front door to the sanctuary. This is the children's education wing. And as we go north, this is the area where the proposed building addition is to be constructed in the future. And then getting closer to the north, again, where the building addition will be constructed. And you can see the houses in Black Fox Crossing 1 directly across that existing privacy fence. And this is the rear of 1938 and 1940 Black Fox Crossing, adjacent to the site of the proposed building addition. 1938 and 1940 Black Fox Crossing are the two houses that share the property line with the church where the buffer would be required. And this is looking south along the west property line. You can see the existing maple trees in that drainage easement, and that from the fence onward over 20 feet is still the church's property. And this is looking south along the west property line once again, and looking north along that west property line. This is the rear of the existing building along the west property line. the rear of the children's education wing, the rear of the sanctuary building. This is looking north towards the adjacent office development. This is the development directly to the north where the building would be closer to the front property line if the variance was granted. And with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions, Matthew, at this point?
Briefly, I believe what I heard was that you said at the time this originally was built in an RM16 zone that there was no need for a buffer. Is there currently a requirement for a buffer on an RM16 zone?
No, because the Black Box Crossing development, the residential development, is also zoned RM16, and the church property is zoned RM16. Because they're light zoning, no buffer is required by ordinance, and the level of buffering on property that does not require a special use permit is determined by adjacent zoning classifications. And that's why the buffer is required along that 120-foot segment, is because that 120-foot segment is zoned commercial highway.
Thank you.
Sure.
Vice Chairman Young, I got a question.
Go ahead.
This is more of a curiosity question than anything else. Is there a need or a purpose to eliminate the dual zoning of this lot, or just let it continue on? I'm trying to think in my own mind, one, why it would remain, or two, why you would want to change it, but it just seems a little odd to me.
Yeah, it's, as I mentioned before, it's kind of a remnant of a zoning master plan for this area that was established before how it was going to develop was known. And so we're kind of living with those zoning boundaries. It would be at the preference of the applicant whether or not he would want to ever come in and try to rezone the property to all be RM16.
Because if he did that, he would be eliminating at least one of these applications.
That's correct.
Or sections. Okay.
And but I think at this point, because a church is permitted by right in both zoning districts, his preference now is to ask for the variance instead of the rezoning.
All right.
And Matthew, I was going to add the 10-foot variance that we're dealing with has to do because of the flag lot and not necessarily trying to get into setbacks or closer to western boundaries or northern boundaries, anything like that.
Right. The setback variances only pertain to the northern property line, and that 42-foot front setback requirement is a function of this being a flag lot. Okay. And that the 42-foot front setback, and considering that a front property line may be more applicable in other instances where there is a more direct view shed to public right-of-way, or when you have a building that is in closer proximity. For example, if the office development to the north was closer to the property line, as opposed to a parking area being right there, the 42-foot front setback may be more applicable in that instance. But I think he's looking at his circumstances for this particular lot, and in his eyes, the 42-foot front setback is not warranted in this instance.
Okay. Any other questions for Matthew? All right. Well, now we'll hear from the applicant. Mr. Bell, is there anything you'd like to add to this application?
As a point of clarification, I've got Matthew's picture, beautiful, and I've got a couple more. I am Wayne Belt, here for Believers Chapel. We are actually completing a master plan that lets us know for all the rest of our property how many buildings we can have. We're having good attendance, so we need some extra parking now, and later in the back we have planned for some, but it will all fit within guidelines of not needing exceptions. We looked at the possibility once we discovered the two different zonings, because the 42-foot, one of those pictures there was, we cannot even see Rutherford Boulevard from our church. And even the back, that's called Hyde Park. The property belongs to Tom Hyde. He's a wonderful neighbor to us, and he has no objection to what we're doing. But the back of his building is 80 feet from our property line. And so we really look at this like it's the side of our building. It's going to be the side. If you look at the plat there, you'll see the front. It's got a canopy where you'll drive through is looking toward Keeneland. So none of our buildings technically are facing Rutherford for a traffic pattern. But in thinking of the buffer zone, if we could look, let's see. The building you see back there is the daycare, which is next door to Hyde Park. If we were to looking directly north, we'd see our neighbor at Hyde Park. The person in the corner of the cul-de-sac at Black Fox Crossing, I happen to have developed that subdivision and built all these houses. But we put these trees up on them. You see the big trees on the left there, the kind of cedar trees, to give them a buffer from seeing the daycare, and put that fence up behind them. So then if you look at this one, you'll see an even further picture that the neighbor on that side has no windows on the side of his house. He doesn't look out. Now, he's not like the ones that are directly behind us. His patio in the back there is totally screened by this. So even on this part, when we build our new building, from them looking at anything, it shouldn't really look any different than what it does now. But relating to the landscape, and Matthew's picture showed that nicely. Let's see, Matthew, if you wouldn't mind on this one. When we look at this one, which is looking south, and that is our children's wing on the left there, and that is our privacy fence, which comes all the way down to the 42-foot setback line. We put that in when we started, but none of our neighbors can see any of the central units. The fence are plenty tall, so they can't see any of that. So the little sliver we're wanting for that is just the option if we need to set a unit there. That actually takes it further away from the neighbors, where if we have to go up 32 more feet, it gets the units closer to them. But that is our tree in the middle. That's the landscape that we have in there, that tree and the next one. You see the pedestal to the right. See the phone pedestal up in the middle there, the green phone pedestal? That is actually our property line. And some of our neighbors, not knowing, went and planted trees, other trees on us that may have to get moved. But all of this property, from the fence to that green pedestal, actually belongs to the church. And we chose not to put a fence right on them because we weren't going to enjoy this grass. So we just put the fence next to the central units. So this 20-foot here in our master plan, what we've discovered is for us to build any additional buildings, they have to be sprinkled. And to have a sprinkled building, our water has to be looped. Our water line that feeds the main building is actually down past that pedestal and comes out of Black Fox Crossing into the back of the building. We're having to, on the front on Rutherford Boulevard, we have a water line to a fire hydrant coming that way, and this is coming from Black Fox. We've got to spend about $50,000 to tie these two water lines in to have any future buildings where they can be sprinkled. So what we're doing in our master plan right now is this spring we'd like to put in the infrastructure for the water. We're not ready to build a building, but once we have this settled, we know where all the buildings will go, we know how they'll fit, and then we can loop our water line, and that's what we're trying to do. But we plan on, and I think we're being good neighbors by how that looks and how we maintain it and how we keep all of that, that for the neighbors it stood once we get the water line in and the grass growing again, it's all going to look the same. It should not look any different. And from the other photos that you looked at, in actuality, when you look at the screening of the central units, they do not have to look at any of those. Let's see if I got one more here. And for the neighbors, I believe it's at 1938 and 40, I took the liberty to go on their patio. That's their patio and their patio furniture, looking out at our education, our children's wing. On our children's wing, that building is 160 feet long in that portion and it only has 3 windows, and that's to let light in. We were able to get light from the other side all of the rest of the way, so they don't have to see much of our building. Our building is metal there in our other education wing, but the back of all these buildings here have vinyl siding, and the gable end all have vinyl siding. So it's not like that they don't look alike or look different. But we think the buffer zone really is not going to buffer anything. It's just a requirement, but we're putting it in, but nobody would be getting a benefit from it. The greater benefit is the fence, these nice trees that are growing, and the screening all the HVACs. So we do look at it more as the 42 feet. We considered rezoning it all to RM16. We still have the issue of having to get our water loop in, so we still need to, it just seemed to be cleaner, do our master plan. We're telling you we'll have 2 buildings there, and that's all. We can have all of our infrastructure in, so when we do build a building, we just connect to it. We're not having to put in infrastructure, water loops, and those type things. So we appreciate your consideration in this. It is an unusual lot, being a flagged lot and having multiple zonings. 85% of this lot, we have 7 acres, is zoned RM16. It's only the front sliver that comes out that's why. So the variance actually will help us to be able to have, we think, the correct size of the property and the correct use of the property. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Belt. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Is there anyone present that wishes to speak for or against the application? If you would, please come forward, sir. State your name and address and give us any comments that you might have.
My name is Tom Booth. I live at 1928 Black Fox Crossing. Wayne, it's nice to meet you. We've talked on the phone a couple of times. Mr. Chairman and Matthew. I think Matthew has passed out some copies of letters, and I'll read through this very quickly, and then we can discuss a little bit. But considering this request for variances, we'd like to request that if the variances are granted, the following be considered as conditional to the variances of the HVAC and landscaping. Number 1, maintain a current Type C buffer or more. Number 2, installation of new HVAC be placed between the proposed building instead of at the rear of the building abutting Black Fox Crossing residential patio and common space. And we'll look at that in a minute. Enhance the natural buffering in the RM16 area for buildings 18 through 21 on your map. We're making this request because current RM16 buffering is inadequate as to the visual aesthetics and sound abatement. In common terms, it's pretty noisy back there 12 months out of the year because you either got to heat it or you got to cool it in those buildings. And there are 4 commercial HVAC units that you saw a picture of, and you'll see it again. And they're making a pretty good noise in the back side of the building. Wayne is right. It's a metal building, and I wish it was something we could do to make it a little bit prettier. We don't object to the church's expansion, but only that they entertain our request for reasonable amendments. Mr. Belt works both with the Believers Chapel and with he's our homeowners association. So we didn't want him to try to stand up here and talk for the church and then come back up and talk for us, so we're presenting it separately. If you look at your map that shows where the things are going to go, and look at where the first future building is, there's a space between it and the second future building, and we were hoping that perhaps the HVAC units could be placed between those 2 buildings as opposed back by the fence from a noise point of view. Discussing the noise, let me just show you again kind of what you saw. These are pictures of the commercial HVAC units. These are good units. They're very efficient, and they'll be there any moment, I think. They're not there yet. There they are. You can look down the fence, looking down the building, and you can see the size of the units. There's a couple of them bigger than others, but they're all pretty large commercial units. And I think what we could maybe consider would be, from a buffering point of view, if you'll see this is right behind my house. Looking right down there, you can see that the units come pretty close to the fence, and there's nothing in there to stop the sound except the fence. Wayne and I talked about the fence some time ago, and we're really glad it's there because it does provide some buffering. but we didn't, there's really nothing else other than that. It would seem that if we could get some bushes or something like that back by that unit, or those units, that would provide some more buffering. This is a picture from my patio, looking out back, and there's the fence. The fence does a reasonably good job, and I think we could do it a little bit better. And I think that buffering on the church side of that fence would be more effective than buffering outside, because once the sound comes up and over the fence, it's out. That's all I've got to say. We just think there's some things that we could probably work out.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else that would like to speak? If there's no one else, we'll close the public hearing and give Mr. Belt a chance to address those.
I personally think that what we've done, our church has been there for a long time. We've had those central units there in the older part of the building for over 20 years now. We do have a fence up, not on the property line, but up near our property. I think the requirement of the RM16, which we comply with, our trees that are in the back of these houses have a 4-inch caliper, I think, when we put those in. And if I'm understanding what this gentleman is requesting is to change the rules relating to landscaping on us. The buffering part of the C buffer would only be 120 feet. And a portion of that would be in a drainage ditch, which I don't think you would want to put it in there. You'd have to come out of it. As far as buffering for sound, I don't know that there's, I don't think that's a reasonable request. And when you buy property and it's next to a church building, you can expect that we do have commercial, we have assembly occupancy, we have a number of people and the kids in the classrooms and things. So I would think it would be reasonable that that's what you have to put in with the building. Turning it the other way, moving it 10 feet is probably not really going to matter that much. But I think by right on the part, except for the 32 feet, except for the at the 42 foot, if you get back, if you didn't approve this, then from that point on, though, I have the right to still have the central unit sitting on the back, but leave the fence up and do some kind of buffering if required. We think that it's kind of extreme to have to do that much buffering there, and so we respectfully disagree that I think that would be asking someone to do an awful lot just because you would like to have something look better.
It's okay if he gets, we'll go one more comment.
One more comment. Point number one, Mr. Belt, that building wasn't there when I moved in 10 years ago. The building was built since when. I'm talking about the unit behind us, the one where the children go. That wasn't there then. So those units were not there when I moved in.
If you would mind addressing the board, please. Give us your comments,
I
please.
apologize. Excuse me, Mr.
That's okay.
Chairman. The units weren't there when I moved in, and it's not aesthetics that we're talking about. It's some sound issues that we're talking about. The building is not used a whole lot, but those units are there, and it keeps it hot or it keeps it cool 12 months a year. And it's more of a consideration that we're asking for. We're not asking for anything to change what he wants to get done, in my opinion, except perhaps the location of the new units, which is further down. It's just more of a sound. I think when I read through some of the things and the buffering issues, it's both from a safety and a sound point of view. This is sound. I'm not looking for aesthetics necessarily, although that would be nice, but sound.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay. Any questions that came up at that point that we want to jump into? There was something I wanted to mention. As far as the heating and air goes, the variance that we're dealing with is between their property and the office complex. Is that correct? There's the west property line. They're meeting setbacks, and there's not a tool this board has to say they can't put them there. Am I saying that correctly?
With respect to the variances with regards to the building and the HVAC equipment, that is specifically as it relates to the northern property line adjacent to the office complex. Now, with respect to the variance to the buffer along the western property line, that northern 120 feet, if the Type C buffer variance is granted, the board may place reasonable conditions on that variance, with respect to any alternative type of screening or locations of HVAC equipment with respect to the buffer. But the first three variances are as it relates to the northern property line only.
Okay, so if I understand, there's to the future building that's, I guess, attaches to the current children's wing. If they decided that the best place for HVAC equipment is on that western property line, that's not something our board has the ability to override?
That's correct. That is,
Okay.
that smaller future building is zoned RM16. The only building that is zoned commercial highway and that kind of is adjacent to where a Type C buffer would be required is the northernmost larger building that is proposed in the corner of the property. But as it is right now, if they wanted to move forward with just that, the smaller future building adjacent to the children's education wing, that's zoned RM16. None of the variances pertain to buffering adjacent to that building or setbacks relating to that building. It's basically all with regards to the larger building at the corner of the property.
All right, any other questions for Matthew? Should we take one of them, and there may be some questions as we get to each portion.
I mean, notwithstanding the HVAC unit question, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we approve the 32-foot variance from the minimum required 42 front building setback, because the way I look at this, in my view, even though it is a front lot line, to me it looks more like and makes more common sense that it's a side lot line, and as Matthew pointed out earlier, there would not be any variance required if, in fact, it was considered a side lot line. So with that, I would make a recommendation that we approve that variance.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for the first portion, the 32-foot variance. Any further discussion on that portion of the application? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And there are none. So that portion has been approved.
Mr. Chairman, pertaining to the proposed heating and air equipment variance, I make a motion to approve.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that point there? And we're dealing with if this were to be placed behind the large future building that is in the commercial highway zone, or that side corner, either one, I guess.
Right.
Yes, that's correct. This would allow the granting of the two variances pertaining to the HVAC equipment would allow the HVAC equipment to be located within the 42-foot front setback line adjacent to the office development to the north.
So that would be just on the northern property line, and that that borders the office complex.
Well, he's not proposing to put the HVAC equipment within actually to the north of the building, but it would be on the west side of the building within the 42-foot front setback.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that item?
And just for clarification, this is to the first request with regards to the HVAC equipment?
Allowing the HVAC equipment in the front setback.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And there are none, so that component is passed as well.
With regard to the next HVAC variance request, I move to allow a 32-foot variance from the minimum required 42 front building setback for the HVAC.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the 32-foot variance. Is there any further discussion necessary on this item? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That component is passed as well. Next, we come to the landscape variance.
Just one question for you, Matthew, with respects to the landscape variance. I'm assuming that we would want, if we approve this portion, we would want to make it subject to staff comments dictating that the fence would go through the whole, the 125 feet that were in question. Because that's part of your comment, so we would want to make sure that we dictate that.
Yeah, and right now I think what Mr. Belt says is that the fence actually stops around the 42-foot front setback, and so that would, if that is made a condition of approval, that would it would need to be extended a little bit, and I think that would need to be subject to the fence being able to coincide with any drainage or water line improvements there as well.
So as part of the application, is it the fence is being extended or not? I'm getting a little confused here.
I don't think he has plans to extend it any further, but certainly
because of the water line coming through.
I think Mr. Belt may be more appropriate to answer that.
Call on you one more time, Mr. Belt.
The fence stops at about a 42-foot place from the property line, and what we would do is...
So already it's that far.
It's far enough down except for the 42 feet, yes.
Yeah.
So we would have to, what I told Matthew we'd do, we'll be subject to whatever they tell us we have to do, but it may be when you get right at the corner, if drainage is needing to turn, we may have to do some kind of landscape something on a little mound, but we'll take it where it needs to go.
Okay.
We don't want the units to be seen. We'll block them, but I think it would have to be determined at the time we did the building that they would tell us what would be required,
Okay.
and we'll certainly understand and accept that.
Okay.
If something needs to happen there, it's just hard to do your building. What this allows us to do here by getting approved is design a building.
Right.
Mr. Halliburton, the photograph, we could put that back up on the screen. We could put the photograph back up on the screen, please. The cable department could put the photograph on the screen, please. Thank you. This photograph here shows the rear of 1938 and 1940 Black Fox Crossing. So that, as you can see, that fence is existing in between the church property and 1938 and 1940, which are the ones where the buffer would be required along that property line.
So his proposal is for the fence, is some trees that he's planted along the other portion Was that part of it?
I have a photo that's a little clearer, if that would help. Then I can put them.
Sure.
I think that, Mr. Bell, I think just the main concern is we want to make sure that the screening, I mean, since we used to go look at these places, but we don't do that anymore. It's hard to tell by some of these pictures how far out this future building will be and whether we're actually screening it with the fence between that. That's my only.
On this picture here, and it's a little dark, where that fence ends, see right about the orange?
Yes.
Then that, if you go forward 42 feet, that would be the end of our property line. So we'll extend this up whatever we can
Okay.
without impeding with the
Yeah.
drainage where it's going to turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But that'll
Sounds
be
good.
something they would decide then. But it just goes straight. It's about a 32-foot extension.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And the fence is all in your plans, and not any additional trees or anything along that line?
Right, what we have to do.
Because of the drainage easements.
The trees that
That's
are.
right. Okay. Thank you, sir. Okay, any further discussion, or you want to address the fourth component there with the variance of the type C buffer?
If no other discussion, I'll make a motion that we approve the variance of the type C buffer, subject to staff comments.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none, so that motion passes, and that application has been approved in its entirety.
And if I could just get some clarification on the condition. Is the board wanting to, as a part of that motion, was it to extend the fence as far north as it can go without affecting drainage and utilities, or I just wanted to get some clarification on that.
I would think so. I mean, it sounds like Mr. Belt's agreeable to that. He just doesn't know where that end is going to be at this point without developing the property in and of itself. Correct, Mr. Belt?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think it's going to go down to the edge of the building. When you get to the 42 feet, you're getting to where all of that is turning and draining.
Right.
But I thought the staff comments would be, when it comes time to do it, what they tell me to do, we're going to have to do it.
Thank you, sir. Get you what you need, Matthew?
Yes, I believe so. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we'll move to a special use permit request. It's application Z13072 by Mr. Matt Taylor of Site Engineering Consultants for St. Paul's Episcopal Church. They're requesting a special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use, a church, for property located in the commercial highway CH and residential single-family RS8 zones at 315 East Main Street. Ken, did you
Vice
want-
Chairman Young, yes, I just wanted to mention that I'll recuse myself from any discussion or vote as I am a member of this church.
Okay. We'll hand it off to Matthew.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. As you mentioned, the subject property is located at 315 East Main Street. It's the current location of the St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The church went before the board back in the early 2000s for a couple of setback variances. You can see it has frontage on 3 streets, both on East Main Street, East College Street, and on North Academy Street, and the church requested several front setback variances. It is located just outside of the Central Business District, and as you know, the Central Business District, there are no setbacks, but because it is primarily in commercial highway, with a small portion being zoned RS8, there are setback requirements and other zoning requirements that do not exist within the Central Business District. As I mentioned, the majority of the property is zoned commercial highway, and I'll show you the zoning map. You can see here, the only portion that is actually zoned RS8 is the very northeast corner of the property. And as you know, churches and expansions to churches in single-family residential zoning districts require a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals. The area has a variety of surrounding land uses. Directly to the south across East Main Street is the East Main Church of Christ. To the west across North Academy Street is a bank and its associated parking lot. To the north across East College Street are single-family residences. To the west along East Main Street is Junior's Foodland, and also sharing a common lot line with the subject property to its east is a single-family residence along East College Street. You see the area of the portion of the building that has kind of a whitish silver roof to it, directly under the word site, or below the word site, is the existing parish hall, which is a one-story building. The applicants would like to demolish the parish hall and rebuild a new two-story parish hall in its place. Now, a good portion of the new parish hall will be located in the RS8 portion of the property. So, because expansion will be occurring in the portion of the property zoned single-family residential, the special use permit is required. Now, you can see here on sheets 2 and 3 of the site plan that has been submitted by the applicant, Mr. Taylor of Site Engineering Consultants, you'll see the existing parish hall that is hatched out. And once we flip the page, voila, there is the new parish hall. Old, new. The total floor area of the addition, according to the applicant, is 13,790 square feet. The exterior of the existing parish hall consists primarily of wood siding and block. The new addition will have a brick exterior and will attempt to match the look of the sanctuary, which was built around the year 2000. The addition will comply with minimum setback requirements. The building addition will be 37 feet 4 inches tall in height at the ridge line and 25 feet at the eave, producing a building height as measured by the zoning ordinance of 31 to 32 feet. Building height per the zoning ordinance for non-flat roofs, for gabled roofs, are the midway point between the ridge line and the eave. And the maximum building height in the RS8 zone is 35 feet, and the height here will be 31 to 32 feet, which is compliant with the maximum building height. No substantive change to the principal use of the property is expected as a result of the reconstruction of the parish hall. And the applicant did submit architectural elevations, and as you can tell, he has his goal was to attempt to match the facade of the existing sanctuary building along East Main Street. And there is an architect's rendering of the proposed addition as it will be viewed from East College Street. With regards to the standards that are in our zoning ordinance for special use permits for churches, the church has very limited parking on site, but it utilizes the bank's parking lot across North Academy Street during services, and no additional on-site parking is proposed with this special use permit. No new accessory uses are proposed with this addition. No new external broadcast systems are proposed, although there is an existing bell tower. A photometric lighting plan has been submitted. It demonstrates compliance with the maximum lighting level of half a foot candle at the property line. All of the new lighting, with the exception of lights at the door on the east side of the building. You'll see here, as I mentioned, it does share common property line with a single-family lot to the west, but there will be no new lights shining towards that residence. The new lights that will be installed will be on the interior side of the building to create kind of a courtyard environment at the center part of the property. The applicant has submitted a letter to the board, or to myself, which I have handed to the board with regards to the lighting, and he has confirmed that there will be no new lighting except at doorways on the west side of the building. No new outdoor recreational areas are proposed with the building addition. And the building, the site plan does depict the location of the building with regards to the location of the house to the west. And as you can see on the site plan, if we could pull that back up, so here is the building addition, and the existing house is here. So the building will actually be adjacent to the backyard of the adjacent house next door to the east, as opposed to being right up next to the existing house to the east. The applicant proposes a Type A buffer along the east property line adjacent to this residence. There is existing vegetation along this property line, and the applicant proposes to supplement the existing vegetation to form a Type A buffer. The applicant will be able to maintain the 10-foot width for the buffer, except where existing parking spaces will protrude slightly into it. There is an existing storage shed along the western property line that will be removed so that the applicant will be able to install that Type A buffer. And in addition, there is an existing dumpster enclosure, not dumpster enclosure, but an enclosure for city solid waste carts along that eastern property line as well. And the applicant will be relocating that so that he will be able to maintain that Type A buffer along the entire eastern property line that it shares with that single-family residence. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following condition. A Type A buffer is required along the eastern property line adjacent to 320 East College Street. This buffer must maintain a width of 10 feet except where there are existing parking spaces. The plant materials in the buffer must be appropriate with respect to the overhead power line. And now I'll show you some photographs of the subject property. There's the front of the church building along East Main Street. And as I mentioned, the applicant is going to attempt to match the materials and style of the existing sanctuary building. And this is the subject property as viewed from East College Street. This is the portion of the parish hall, this one-story building that will be demolished. This is looking at the subject property from East College Street once again. And once again, a closer view of the portion of the building to be demolished and rebuilt. As I mentioned, it's one story right now, and a two-story structure will be going back in its place. This is viewing that portion of the building to be demolished from the Junior's parking lot. And this is looking eastward from the church property at the Junior's Foodland property. Junior's Foodland to the east. And this is looking along the east property line towards the adjacent house. As you can see, there is some existing vegetation that the applicant will be supplementing to form a Type A buffer. It's the existing house at 320 East College. Same house. And the existing houses across East College Street. And with that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Taylor is present if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? If not, we'll call on Mr. Taylor, see if there's anything you'd like to add to the application.
No, I think Matthew took everything I was going to say and then some. We do have the architect and a representative from the church here if you do have any questions for us, though.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any questions, Mr. Taylor, of any of his cohorts? Sound like none. We'll move on then to the public hearing. Is there anyone present that would like to speak for or against this application? If so, would you come forward? Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for discussions or a motion.
If there's no discussion, I move to approve the variance request subject to staff comments.
And I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Thank you guys for coming in. Next, we'll move to staff reports and other business. We have one item, request by Mr. Mike Cullen for a waiver by the BZA in accordance with Section 8H of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, that if an application for a special use permit is denied by the BZA, a reapplication pertaining to the same property and requesting the same special use permit may not be filed within 18 months of the date final action was taken on the previous application. The special use permit in question was in order for the applicant to conduct a home occupation at his residence located in a residential single-family RS-12 zone at 1207 Azure Way. The home occupation consisted of a group instruction for people convicted of driving under the influence or reckless endangerment. Matthew, you would walk us through this one.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. Subject property is located at 1207 Azure Way, zoned RS-12. You'll recall back in July of this year, the applicant made application to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special use permit for a home-based business. He teaches a class to folks who have been convicted of DUI or reckless endangerment. And I believe the class would be about once every 3 weeks, once every month. And the home occupation, since it was going to have people coming to the house, clients coming to the house, required a special use permit from the Board of Zoning Appeals. His request was denied back in July. The zoning ordinance states that when a special use permit is denied, the applicant must wait 18 months to file the same special use permit application before the board for it to be considered again. That is, unless the Board of Zoning Appeals authorizes a waiver of that 18 months and allows the applicant to apply sooner than that 18 months. The applicant has submitted additional information to the board for the board to consider in determining whether or not to let him reapply to be heard in January. So a public hearing is not warranted for today's matter, which is why it's being brought up under staff reports and other business. If the board were to waive the 18-month waiting period, the applicant would be eligible to appear before the board next month, at which time we would have a public hearing. If the board chooses not to waive the 18-month waiting period, the applicant will not be eligible to file a special use permit request until after January 31st, 2015. Just to kind of summarize some of the information that the applicant has presented or has submitted to staff, and I believe he has some additional information that he would like the board to consider in determining whether or not to waive the 18-month waiting period. And by the way, I have included in your agenda materials the application materials from July, as well as the minutes from the July meeting and the additional paperwork that he has submitted with this request for a waiver. Just to kind of summarize the information that the applicant has submitted, he states that he has had a total of 105 students during the course of the last 18 months, an average of 5.8 per month. Of the 105, 9 were arrested for driving while on prescription medication, while the remainder were alcohol-related. The applicant has submitted a spreadsheet with a breakdown of the number of students from July to November, during which time he held classes off-site. After he was denied by the board, he has been holding his classes in conference rooms of hotels and similar meeting spaces. And the classes that he has had during those times have had between 6 and 8 students apiece. I will, that spreadsheet is, you can pull that up, it's this spreadsheet here that he has submitted is with regards to the last 5 months. And as a note, Mr. Cohen indicated that he held 2 classes during August with 6 students apiece, and that's why it shows 12 students for August. In his letter to the board, he provides examples of non-residential uses in the vicinity of his house, and he can elaborate on those when he speaks to the board. The applicant has verbally indicated that he will remove 2 of his vehicles from the property and park his personal vehicle in the garage, leaving 4 parking spaces in his driveway. He is committing to only allowing 4 students to drive to his class and park at his residence. He will require any additional students to be dropped off. And one of the things that we did not have an answer for the board back in July was with regards to the width of Azure Way. He indicates in his letter that the width of Azure Way is 36 feet. And just to elaborate on that and to maybe clarify, Azure Way is classified as a residential subcollector in the city's major thoroughfare plan. Residential subcollectors have a 24-foot pavement width, including 2 12-foot wide travel lanes according to the city's standard street specifications. Azure Way, though, predates the current standard street specifications, and the applicant's measurement of 36 feet was from face of curb to face of curb, including the gutters. The pavement width is actually about 33 to 34 feet, and as a frame of reference, 33 feet is the same pavement width required for a street that is a 3-lane cross-section, which includes 3 11-foot travel lanes. So it's actually wider than we would require a residential subcollector street. To today's standards, were it to be built, it would have a 24-foot pavement width as opposed to a 33 or 34-foot pavement width. With that being said, I think Mr. Cullen would like to make his case to the board with regards to the waiver, and I think he's got an exhibit, and I'll provide an easel.
Good afternoon. The last time I was here, I think it was in July, there were basically 2 problems and reasons why you turned me down. And one was the road. You weren't sure, you didn't know, you just didn't know what the road situation was. So I'm going to, and this is all to scale, I'm going to show you that there's plenty of road space for parking, but I'm not going to allow any more parking on the street. It's all going to be in my driveway. Each of the students call me to register, and I'll be asking them, are you going to drive or be dropped off? And once, I get 4 people to say they're going to drive, then anybody else, I'll have to tell them they'll have to be dropped off, that there's no more parking. You also, the other thing was kind of you were concerned with was the neighborhood, how it affected, it's not Northwoods or one of the big, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 neighborhood. There's 1,300 homes in there now, and there's going to be a total of 2,000. They started at around 79 or 80,000, and they've gone up a little bit since then. There's about 10 or 15 different ways to get into the various parts through St. Andrews. There's a convenience store right in the center of the subdivision. Right behind me, I share a property line with a large church, which they do classes there on Wednesday evening. They have 2 services on Sunday. Another, I think it's another, like not even 2/10 of a mile from there, there's another church that's smaller. And then going the other direction, there's another church the first two are in the subdivision. The other church is across the street, but it's still just right up the road. It's a blue-collar neighborhood. It is not quiet. There is a fire station number 9, like 1/10 of a mile from my house on Cason Lane. And they're called out probably 20 times a day, where they go out with their sirens on and day and night. Also, the police are zooming up and down the highway with their sirens on and ambulances. So it's not like I'm disturbing anybody. I've gone to all my neighbors, and they've all, did you hand that out? Both sides of them have said, we didn't even know you, and I've been doing this for several years, said weren't even aware of you doing this. And they don't object to it now, or in the past, or in the future. So none of them have children except for one, which he's about 10. But all of them don't have a problem. They weren't even aware I was doing it, because the people come in, spend 4 or 5 hours, and then they leave, and it's over with. And this is every 3 weeks or so. This is the book the state. Everybody that teaches this class has to teach this book, and it's about drinking and drugs and heredity and strokes. It's about your health as well. It's not just about drinking. If a family has cancer or diabetes, heart disease, it's very likely some of your family members will get it as well. And same thing with alcohol and drugs. Most of the people that are on drugs are people that all of them have been prescribed by a physician. I had a banker here that was in charge of 5 or 6 banks. He hurt his back putting shrubbery in his new yard, and he was on his back for 3 days with pain pills. Well, 3 o'clock in the morning, he felt better, and he was hungry, and so he went up to Steak and Shake to get something to eat. On the way back, on Brinkley Road, and if you all know where that is, it's just a 2-lane country road, I guess. And if you're driving there, there's potholes, and he was over to the left just a little bit to avoid the potholes, and he was pulled over and arrested for DUI because he had mentioned to the policeman that he was on his back and was taking some sort of pain pills. There's almost every story with the drugs is because of that, but anyway, my frontage of my house is 100 feet. So there's room for, I think, 9 cars, even though it's not going to happen because of the driveway situation. The width of the road, there's enough room. It's about 36 feet from here to here, which I measured my truck, and it's 8 feet. So you've got enough room to park like 9 cars here, which all of this is kind of moot because I'm not going to allow any parking, but there's ample parking, and none of the neighbors are having a problem with it. It's once every 3 weeks, and I'm just saying that the neighborhood is very loud with the fire station and the police running up and down the road. That, my little quiet, could be a Bible study class for anybody else, if I said it, but it's not. It's something that they were convicted of driving, and they got it reduced to reckless endangerment or DUI. If you blow or if your blood registers 0.12 or 3, they can drop it down and keep you away from having a DUI on your record. So these are mostly young children, young kids, and there's no, people doing heroin or stuff like that, cocaine or any of that kind of stuff. It's medicine that doctors have given them. I think that's going to be about it. I'd like an opportunity to come back next month and present some more information to you. There's a lot of, 2 doors down, there's a lady that sells Tupperware. There's a lot of people in the neighborhood that do medical billing for doctors. They do websites. There's across from me, there's a cul-de-sac. There's a guy that sells insurance and has got all the information on his car. The association says you can have a business, a home business in your house. You just can't have a sign put up, and it can't be retail. You can't be selling cupcakes or something that you're making in your house. But it is permitted in the covenants is to do that. You can't have a home-based business, just no signs. You have a potato chip truck or something like that, you can't park it in the neighborhood, saying Frito-Lays or, selling milk or something to that neighborhood. I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I don't remember too many of these since I've been on the board. Maybe one other time it's kind of, let's go our gut, what we feel like. I guess there's not any standards of this sort of thing to guide us. I don't know that while it's a residential, I guess I'll go first as I'm rambling. The number of people at once, and while it may be every residential area is unique, it is supposed to be residential. I don't know from what I've heard that I hear that's a whole lot different from the last time. Notified some more of your neighbors of what's going on. I want to give everybody a chance. I'm okay hearing the waiver. I don't know that I've heard anything that would change my decision from the last time. So I don't know whether to cut it off now or go ahead and. Again, that's just my thoughts for the board. So
one of the 2 reasons was the parking, which I'm going to eliminate that altogether. And the other reason was the environment of the neighborhood. And it is not a quiet neighborhood with the fire department, and all the neighbors around me, didn't even know I was doing it. And they all have, I have signatures where they've all said, we don't care if you continue to do it. So I'm not really bothering anybody. And with the church behind me doing it, and the other 2 churches giving counseling on marriage problems and financial problems and drug and alcohol problems, I'm not doing anything the people that border me do the same thing.
Well, I'm not opposed to granting a waiver in this instance to allow Mr. Cullen to have an opportunity to be heard on this again, allow another public hearing. I think I have similar questions as I did last time, but at this time, since we're only considering that there's been some research conducted, Mr. Collins presented more information at this time, so I'm not opposed to allowing him the opportunity to reapply.
Is this something that requires a motion once it's, okay.
Because it was that a motion.
I guess that is a motion then. I'll move to allow reapplication. Allow a waiver for reapplication.
Can I ask a question before? So, other than a sign that goes in somebody's yard, what is the distance that the city mails notices with respects to this public hearing?
We mail notices to within 250 feet, or all properties within 250 feet of the subject property, and that is to both property owners, and if the property is not owner-occupied, to the tenant of the property as well.
So in this case, that might be 3 houses down?
Approximately.
I mean,
And in a circle, to the extent that their house is not all.
behind, and yeah, okay. Mr. Cullen, I don't have a problem with the coming before the board. This may not be appropriate, what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of the issues that I had was that one of the comments that was made in the public hearing was, one, they didn't want it in their neighborhood, and two, they brought pictures of the upkeep of the house at one point in time. And so that showed to me, are we being a good neighbor with respects to, and then wanting a special use permit at the same time. So I think that if in fact that it is allowed, depending on how if we choose to hear it again in January, I think that to the people that did have a problem with it, I think you need to try to reach out to those people and make sure that they're comfortable with it also.
I don't remember the picture. I do remember the one lady. She lives about 4 or 5 blocks from me. I've been paying, because I'm disabled now. I became disabled last year in April of 13, and I can't do anything. I have trouble walking from here to the car. So I've been paying somebody for the last 2 years to, cut my grass and trim it and edge it and all the other various things. So that lady, was, I'm not sure what her deal was, but half of what she said was slander, in my opinion, or maybe all of it, because the gate, there was a problem with, it's an 8-foot wooden fence around the back, and the doors were so heavy they started to wobble a little bit, and one of the guys here, what's his name? Came out to the house several times, and I eventually just took the gates down because they were so big and heavy. There was no way to. And that was, she mentioned something about going to court. I can't think of the man's name here, but if you said it, I'd know it. But he was in the zoning maybe, or regulations or something. But anyway, she was just, I'm not sure what she was trying to do.
Yeah.
But all of it was, 99% of it was bogus.
I would just caution that any time that you're trying to ask for an exception for something different that's done in the neighborhood, you definitely want to, and I mean, evident that these people don't have a problem with it, I feel like that you would need to go to the extra effort to be a good neighbor with
Yeah,
respect.
I almost wrote her a letter, but I didn't. I figured I'd just leave her alone.
Yeah.
I don't remember any pictures, but that doesn't mean there wasn't any. But she was just saying how the yard was, the weeds were this high, is what she, 3 feet high or something, and they've never been that high. There was a time when I was disabled, and it got worse and worse, and I have a riding lawnmower, so, and I still do, but I pay somebody to do it now, and have been for several years.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I believe we have a motion to waive the 18-month period.
Monty was the guy. Monty was the...
Building codes.
Yeah, that's who it was.
I'll second Ms. King's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to waive the 18-month. Any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? There are none. So we have waived the 18-month waiting period.
Okay, thank you. Y'all have
Thank
a
you.
good Christmas.
Sound like we'll see you in January. Any other items?
Nothing but wish everybody happy holiday season, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year.
You as well. And with that, we will adjourn.